Look, I need to tell you something that happened 3 months ago, and I'm still not sure I've wrapped my head around it. My name's Sarah, I'm 34, and I thought I had my life figured out. Divorced mom, decent job as a paralegal, a cute little rental house in the suburbs of Charlotte, and the most important thing in my world, my 7-year-old son, Mason. People always told me I was handling the divorce well. You know, keeping it together, being the bigger person. What they didn't know was that I was barely holding on by my fingernails most days. My ex-husband, Derek, and I split up 2 years ago. It wasn't dramatic or anything. No screaming matches, no thrown dishes, just this slow, painful realization that we'd become strangers who happened to share a mortgage and a kid. He's a contractor, works with his hands, pretty laid-back guy. We got married young, like 23, and by the time we hit 30, we'd grown into completely different people. The divorce was amicable, as they say. We did the whole co-parenting thing, split custody 50-50, kept things civil for Mason's sake. And honestly, for a while it worked. Derek would pick Mason up every other week. They'd do their guy stuff, fishing, video games, basketball in the driveway. Mason loved his dad. I mean, really loved him, and that made everything easier, you know? But then, about 6 months ago, things started to shift. Mason would come home from Derek's place and he'd be different, quieter. He'd sit at the kitchen table, pushing his mac and cheese around his plate, barely eating. I'd ask him if everything was okay, and he'd just shrug. You know how kids are. Sometimes they're moody for no reason. I figured it was just a phase, maybe something at school, maybe he was tired. But it kept happening, week after week. And then, one night, about 3 months ago, Mason climbed into my bed around 2 in the morning. I woke up to find him curled up next to me, his little body trembling. I turned on the bedside lamp and saw his face, those big brown eyes, just like Derek's, filled with tears. My heart dropped into my stomach. I pulled him close and whispered, "Baby, what's wrong? Did you have a nightmare?" He shook his head against my chest, and then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Mommy, I think Daddy's doing something bad." I sat up straight, my mind racing through 1,000 terrible possibilities. Was Derek in trouble? Was he using drugs? Gambling? Was someone hurting Mason? I tried to keep my voice steady, calm, even though panic was rising in my throat like bile. "What do you mean, honey? What's Daddy doing?" Mason looked up at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like he was carrying a weight too heavy for his little shoulders. He's been acting weird. He's always on his phone, smiling at it, and there's a lady that comes over sometimes. She brings cookies, but they taste weird, and Daddy told me not to tell you about her. My stomach twisted. A woman, of course. I mean, Derek and I had been divorced for 2 years. He had every right to date. But the fact that he'd told Mason to keep it a secret, that felt wrong. That felt like a violation of the trust we'd built as co-parents. I held Mason tighter and promised him everything was okay, that he didn't do anything wrong by telling me. I got him back to sleep, and then I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. Who was this woman? Why was it a secret? And why did Mason seem so uncomfortable about it? The next morning, I did what any self-respecting modern woman would do. I called my best friend Jenna and word vomited the entire situation over coffee at our usual spot, this little cafe downtown with the good croissants. Jenna, bless her, is the kind of friend who tells it like it is. She's been married for 10 years, has 3 kids, and 0 patience for BS. She listened to my whole rambling story, stirring her latte with that knowing look on her face, and then she said, "Sarah, you need to talk to Derek, like today. This sneaking around thing isn't cool, especially if Mason's picking up on weird vibes." I knew she was right, but the thought of confronting Derek made my anxiety spike. We'd worked so hard to keep things drama-free, but this wasn't about me or my feelings. This was about Mason feeling safe and secure. So that afternoon, I texted Derek, "Hey, can we talk about Mason? It's important." He responded within minutes, which honestly surprised me. Derek was never the fastest texter. "Sure, what's up?" I didn't want to get into it over text, so I called him. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the sound of a circular saw in the background. He was probably on a job site. "Hey, Sarah, everything okay?" His voice sounded casual, maybe a little concerned, but nothing out of the ordinary. I took a deep breath and just dove in. Mason said something last night that worried me. He said you've been acting different and that there's a woman coming around and that you told Mason not to tell me about her. There was a long pause. The saw stopped buzzing in the background. When Derek finally spoke, his tone had shifted, defensive, maybe a little guilty. Sarah, I was going to tell you. I've been seeing someone. Her name's Linda. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal? I felt my jaw clench. Derek and I had been divorced for 2 years. I don't care if you date, but Mason's uncomfortable, and that matters. I think maybe we should all meet. Me, Derek, Linda. Let's clear the air. Another pause. Then, yeah, okay, that's fair. Let me talk to Linda and we'll figure something out. We hung up, and I felt this weird mix of relief and dread. I'd opened Pandora's box, and now I had to deal with whatever came crawling out. A few days later, Derek texted me suggesting we all meet for lunch that Saturday at this family-friendly restaurant Mason loved, the kind with the arcade games and mediocre pizza. I agreed, figuring neutral ground was best. I didn't tell Mason about the meeting ahead of time. I just said we were going to lunch with Daddy. He seemed okay with it, though I noticed he got quieter as we drove to the restaurant. When we walked in, Derek was already there, sitting in a booth near the back, and next to him was Linda. I'll be honest, I don't know what I was expecting, but she wasn't it. Linda looked like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle blog. She was maybe early 40s, blonde hair, perfectly styled, wearing this flowy bohemian dress and statement jewelry. She had this warm, genuine smile that made you want to trust her immediately. As we approached, she stood up and extended her hand. "Sarah, it's so nice to finally meet you. Derek's told me so much about you." Her voice was friendly, no hint of awkwardness or competition. I shook her hand, feeling suddenly underdressed in my jeans and t-shirt. "Nice to meet you too, Linda." Mason climbed into the booth next to Derek, and I slid in across from them, next to Linda. For a few minutes, we made small talk, ordered food, talked about the weather, the kind of meaningless chatter that fills uncomfortable silences. But I could see Mason watching Linda out of the corner of his eye, his little face scrunched up in that way that meant he was thinking hard about something. Linda tried to engage him, asking about school and his favorite games, but he gave her short one-word answers. It wasn't like Mason to be rude, but he was clearly not warming up to her. About halfway through lunch, Mason tugged on Derek's sleeve and whispered something in his ear. Derek nodded, and Mason scrambled out of the booth, heading toward the bathroom. Linda watched him go, then turned to me with a slightly sad smile. "He doesn't like me much, does he?" I felt a pang of sympathy for her. "He's just adjusting. Change is hard for kids." She nodded, picking at her salad. "I get it. I have a daughter, actually. She's 16. Teenager stuff, you know? But I remember when she was Mason's age." That caught my attention. "Oh, you have a daughter? Does she live with you?" Linda's smile faltered for just a second, so quick I almost missed it. "Most of the time, yeah. Her dad's not really in the picture." The way she said it made me wonder what the story was there, but I didn't push. We chatted a bit more, and I found myself actually liking Linda. She was kind, seemed genuine, and clearly cared about making this work. By the time lunch ended, I felt better about the situation. Derek walked us out to the parking lot, Mason trailing behind, still quiet. As I buckled Mason into his car seat, Derek pulled me aside. "Thanks for doing this. I know it was weird." I nodded. "Just be more upfront next time, okay? For Mason's sake." That night, I thought things would settle down. Mason went to bed without much fuss, and I poured myself a glass of wine and settled in to watch some trashy reality TV. But around 11, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You should know what Derek's really up to. Check his house tomorrow night. Come alone." My heart started pounding. I stared at the message, reading it over and over. What the hell? Was this some kind of prank? I tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail, one of those generic automated messages. I considered texting Derek, but what would I even say? "Hey, I got a weird anonymous message about you. What's up with that?" I decided to sleep on it, but sleep didn't come easy that night. The next day at work, I was useless. I kept staring at that text message, turning it over in my mind. Who would send something like that? And what was I supposed to check at Derek's house? By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, I'd made up my mind. I was going. Not because I thought Derek was doing anything truly awful, but because I needed to know. Mason was with my mom that night. She'd picked him up from school for their weekly grandma date, so I had the evening free. I drove to Derek's neighborhood around 7, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. He lived in this nice development about 20 minutes from my place, a 3-bedroom ranch he'd bought right after the divorce. I parked down the street, feeling like a complete psycho. What was I doing? This was insane. But I couldn't turn back now. Derek's truck was in the driveway, and I could see lights on inside the house. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, debating whether to just drive home and forget about the whole thing. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. Another car pulled into the driveway, a white SUV. Linda got out, carrying what looked like grocery bags. She walked up to the door, and Derek answered immediately, pulling her into a hug before ushering her inside. Okay, so they were having dinner. Nothing weird about that. I was about to leave when I noticed something odd. Linda had left the passenger side door of her SUV open, and sitting in the front seat, barely visible in the dim light, was a teenage girl. Linda's daughter, I assumed. But the girl wasn't getting out. She just sat there staring at her phone. I watched for another minute, then Linda came back out. She went to the passenger side and seemed to be having an intense conversation with the girl. Even from this distance, I could see animated hand gestures, the girl shaking her head. Finally, the girl got out of the car, slouching toward the house like she was walking to her own execution. She was tall, thin, with long dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She was wearing ripped jeans and an oversized hoodie, and even from a distance I could see the scowl on her face. Linda put her arm around the girl's shoulders, guiding her inside. The door closed behind them. I sat there, feeling confused. What was the big secret here? So Derek was having dinner with his girlfriend and her daughter. That seemed normal, maybe even healthy. I was starting to think the anonymous text was just some drama-stirring BS, maybe from one of Derek's exes or someone with a grudge. I was about to start my car when my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Still there? Good. Wait 15 minutes, then go to the side window on the left, you'll see. My mouth went dry. Someone was watching me. I looked around the dark street but saw no one. Every instinct told me to get the hell out of there, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, kept me glued to my seat. I waited. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. My mind raced through possibilities. Was Derek dealing drugs? Running some kind of scam? Was Linda in on it? Finally, I checked my watch. 15 minutes. I got out of my car as quietly as possible and made my way across the street, staying in the shadows. Derek's house had a privacy fence around the backyard, but the side of the house was exposed. I crept along the fence line until I reached the window the text had mentioned. It was slightly open, the curtain drawn, but not completely closed. I could hear voices inside. I crouched down below the window, my heart hammering, feeling like a complete lunatic. What was I doing? This was Derek's private home, but I'd come this far. I slowly raised my head until I could peek through the gap in the curtains. What I saw made my blood run cold.
The window looked into the dining room. Derek was sitting at the head of the table, Linda to his right, and the teenage girl to his left. But it was what was on the table that made me freeze. Documents. Lots of them. Derek was pointing at something, explaining while Linda nodded. The teenage girl looked miserable, her arms crossed, slumped in her chair. I couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but I caught snippets. Derek's voice, cheerful and confident. And once we file this, everything will be smooth sailing. Linda's voice, softer. I think she understands. She's just nervous. And then the girl's voice, bitter and sharp. I don't want to do this. This is insane. I shifted position slightly to get a better view of the documents. My legal training kicked in, and even from this awkward angle, I could make out letterheads, estate planning documents, trust agreements, beneficiary designation forms. And then I saw it, a marriage certificate, blank, waiting to be filled out. My mind reeled. They were getting married? But why all the secrecy? Why the weird setup with all these legal documents? And why did that girl look so miserable about it? I watched as Derek stood up and walked over to a cabinet, pulling out a bottle of champagne. He popped the cork with a grin, and Linda laughed, holding out her glass. But the girl just stared at the table, her jaw clenched tight. I needed to hear more. I moved closer to the window, trying to catch their words. Derek was toasting. To new beginnings, to our family, to making sure everyone's taken care of. Linda clinked her glass against his, beaming. I never thought I'd get this lucky again. And then the girl spoke, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Yeah, real lucky. Getting married so you can steal from me. The room went silent. Derek's smile froze. Linda's face drained of color. And I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What the hell was going on? Derek set down his glass, his tone shifting to something harder, more controlled. Emma, we've talked about this. Nobody's stealing anything from you. This is about protecting you, making sure you're taken care of when my dad dies. Emma cut him off, her voice rising. You can say it. When my dad finally kicks it from the cancer. That's what you mean, right? And then you two can swoop in and take everything. Linda reached across the table, trying to take Emma's hand, but the girl yanked it away. Sweetie, that's not fair. Your dad wants this. He wants to make sure you're okay, that someone's looking out for you. Derek and I, we care about you. Emma laughed, but it was a horrible sound, choked and bitter. You've known him for 6 months, Mom. 6 months. And suddenly you're getting married and he's going to be my stepdad and manage my trust fund. How stupid do you think I am? I felt sick. The pieces were starting to come together, and the picture they formed was ugly. Linda's daughter's father was dying, cancer, Emma had said, and somehow Derek had inserted himself into this situation, convinced Linda to marry him, probably with promises to help manage Emma's inheritance. I thought about Mason's warnings, his discomfort around Linda. Had he picked up on something being off? Kids have instincts about this stuff. Derek's voice turned cold, a tone I'd rarely heard during our marriage. Emma, I've been patient with you, but your attitude needs to change. Your mom and I are getting married next week. Next week? I mouthed the words silently, shock rippling through me. And whether you like it or not, I'm going to be your stepdad. Now, we can do this the easy way, where you cooperate and everyone benefits, or we can do it the hard way. Your choice. The threat was barely veiled. Emma stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm calling my dad. She pulled out her phone, but Linda jumped up, grabbing her wrist. Emma, no! Your father is sick. He doesn't need the stress. We've talked about this. He approved all of this. Emma's face crumbled. He approved it because you manipulated him. He's so doped up on pain meds, he barely knows what day it is. She ripped her arm away and ran toward what I assumed was the hallway. I heard a door slam. Linda sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Derek poured himself another glass of champagne, unbothered. She'll come around, he said calmly. Once the money starts flowing, she'll see we did this for her own good. I'd heard enough. I backed away from the window, my mind racing, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there before anyone saw me. I made it back to my car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Derek wasn't just moving on with his life, he was scamming a dying man and his family. And the worst part, he was going to get away with it if someone didn't stop him. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? I'd been spying on my ex-husband through his window. I had no proof of anything illegal, just a gut feeling and some overheard conversation. I needed to think. I needed a plan. But first, I needed to make sure Mason was safe. If Derek was capable of this, what else might he do? I drove to my mom's house, probably breaking every speed limit along the way. When I walked in, Mason was in his pajamas, sitting on the couch with my mom watching cartoons. He looked so small, so innocent. The thought of Derek using him or putting him in harm's way made me want to scream. My mom took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. Sarah, honey, what happened? I glanced at Mason, not wanting to scare him. "Mom, can I talk to you in the kitchen?" We left Mason with his cartoons, and I spilled everything in hushed, frantic whispers. My mom, God bless her, didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she said, "You need to find out more about this Emma girl and her father. If Derek's doing what you think he's doing, there's got to be a paper trail."
She was right. I needed information. That night, after I got Mason home and into bed, I opened my laptop and started digging. I searched for Linda's name combined with Charlotte. Her daughter had mentioned her dad was sick, so I figured they were local. After about an hour of scrolling through social media and public records, I found her. Linda Forrester, divorced, worked as a real estate agent. And there, in her Facebook posts from 3 years ago, photos of her with a man and a young Emma. The posts were full of happy family moments, beach vacations, birthday parties. Then, about a year ago, the tone shifted. Posts asking for prayers for a difficult journey ahead, mentions of hospital visits and treatment centers. I kept digging and found an obituary draft, actually a caring bridge page, for Emma's father, David Forrester, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim. But here's what really got me. David Forrester wasn't just some regular guy. He owned a successful construction supply company. According to the Caring Bridge page and some light Googling, the business was worth several $million. Emma stood to inherit everything, held in trust until she turned 21. That's what Derek was after. Not love, not companionship, money. And he'd targeted a vulnerable woman and her dying ex-husband to get it. I felt bile rise in my throat. This was Derek, the man I'd married, the father of my child? I barely slept that night, my mind churning through possibilities. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I needed to talk to Emma. But how? I couldn't exactly show up at Derek's house. I needed to be smarter than that. I got lucky. On Linda's Facebook, she'd posted about Emma's school. She was a sophomore at Northwest High. It was risky, but I didn't have many options. That afternoon, I drove to the school just as classes were letting out. I sat in my car, scanning the crowd of teenagers streaming out the doors, looking for that tall girl with the messy ponytail. And then I saw her. She was walking alone, earbuds in, that same scowl on her face. I got out of the car and approached carefully, not wanting to freak her out. "Emma?" She looked up, confused, pulling out one earbud. "Do I know you?" I took a breath. "No, but I know your mom and Derek. I'm Derek's ex-wife, Sarah. I need to talk to you. It's important." Her expression shifted from confusion to suspicion to something like hope. "Are you here to stop them?" The desperation in her voice broke my heart. "Maybe, but I need to understand what's happening first. Can we talk somewhere?" She looked around nervously, then nodded. "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here, but I've only got like 30 minutes before my mom expects me home." We walked to the coffee shop in silence, Emma glancing over her shoulder like she expected Derek or her mom to jump out from behind a tree. Once we were seated in a corner booth, both clutching mediocre lattes, I jumped right in. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." And she did. Emma's story was heartbreaking. Her parents had divorced when she was 12, amicably, and her dad had always been her rock. When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer a year ago, Emma's world fell apart. Her mom, Linda, struggled to cope. She threw herself into work, into staying busy, anything to avoid facing the reality that David was dying. About 6 months ago, Linda met Derek at some home improvement store. He was buying supplies for a job. She was browsing for a client. They hit it off, started dating. At first, Emma thought it was good for her mom to have someone, a distraction from the grief. But then Derek started coming around more, started asking questions about David's business, his assets, Emma's inheritance. He made it seem casual, Emma said, her voice tight, like he was just curious, being supportive. But I saw through it. I told my mom, but she wouldn't listen. She said I was being unfair, that Derek was a good guy. Then, about a month ago, Derek suggested to Linda that they get married, fast, before David passed, so that Derek could help Linda manage the emotional and financial fallout. He framed it as being her support system, her partner through the darkest time of her life. Linda, exhausted and desperate for someone to lean on, said yes.
But here's the kicker. Derek had also convinced David that the marriage was a good idea. He visited David in the hospital, spun this story about how he'd take care of Linda and Emma, make sure the business stayed afloat, make sure Emma's trust was managed properly. David, pumped full of morphine and facing his own mortality, agreed. He signed documents naming Derek as a co-trustee of Emma's inheritance. "My dad doesn't know what he's doing," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "He's so out of it most of the time, and Derek just swooped in and took advantage." I felt rage boiling in my chest. "Have you talked to any lawyers? Someone who could challenge this?" She shook her head miserably. "My dad's lawyer is old, a family friend. He thinks Derek is great because Derek has been kissing his ass. And my mom won't listen to me. She's so desperate to believe Derek is a good guy that she's blind to what's happening." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Emma, I'm going to help you. I don't know how yet, but I promise I'm not going to let Derek do this." She looked at me with such relief, such hope, that I felt the weight of that promise settle on my shoulders. I had to follow through, not just for Emma, but for Mason. If Derek was capable of this, I needed to protect my son from him. That night, I called Jenna again. I filled her in on everything, and she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Sarah, you need to be careful. If Derek finds out you're poking around, he could get nasty, maybe go after custody of Mason out of spite." The thought made me feel sick, but I knew she was right. I had to be strategic. Over the next few days, I did more digging. I reached out to a lawyer friend from work, explaining the situation hypothetically. She confirmed what I suspected. If Derek was named as a co-trustee through coercion or undue influence, especially if David was incapacitated, it could potentially be challenged in court. But it would be messy, expensive, and require proof. I needed proof. I also needed to understand the timeline. According to Emma, Derek and Linda were planning to get married in less than a week. Once they were married, Derek's position would be much stronger legally. I had to act fast.
I texted the unknown number that had sent me the original message. "Who are you? Why are you helping?" I didn't expect a response, but a few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Someone who knows what Derek is. Stop him before he destroys more lives." That didn't exactly narrow it down. Could it be another ex? A former business partner? I racked my brain trying to think of anyone from Derek's past who might have a grudge, but came up empty. Whoever it was, they'd set me on this path, and now I had to see it through. 2 days before the wedding, I decided to make a bold move. I called Derek directly. "Hey, I need to drop off some of Mason's stuff. Can I swing by tonight?" He sounded surprised but agreed. "Yeah, sure. Around 7? Perfect." My plan was risky. While Derek was distracted, I needed to get into his home office. He kept all his important documents there, and I was betting he had copies of the trust documents for Emma, with Derek listed as co-trustee. There was also a document I didn't expect, a prenuptial agreement. I skimmed it quickly and my jaw dropped. The prenup basically stated that if Linda and Derek divorced, he got nothing from her assets. But, and this was the key part, it said nothing about his role as trustee of Emma's inheritance. He'd structured it so that even if the marriage fell apart, he'd still control Emma's money. This wasn't just opportunistic, it was calculated, premeditated. I heard footsteps in the hallway and panic surged through me. I quickly snapped photos of every page with my phone, shoved the folder back in the drawer, and slipped out of the office just as Derek appeared at the end of the hall. "There you are, thought you fell in." He was smiling, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of suspicion. "Yeah, sorry, got a call from work." I held up my phone as proof. He nodded, seeming to accept it, and we went back to the kitchen where Mason was happily slurping lemonade. I got out of there as fast as I could without seeming suspicious, and once Mason and I were back in the car, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I had the proof. Now I needed to figure out what to do with it. That night, I sent the photos to my lawyer friend. Her response came an hour later. "This is bad. He set this up to survive a divorce, but the trust appointment could be challenged if you can prove David Forrester was coerced or incapacitated when he signed. You need to get Emma and her mom to an attorney ASAP." Easier said than done. Linda was so deep under Derek's spell that I doubted she'd listen to reason. But I had to try. The wedding was in 1 day. I called Emma, bypassing Linda entirely. Emma, I have proof. Meet me tomorrow morning before the wedding. Bring your mom if you can. I'll try, she said, her voice small, but she's not going to want to hear it. The next morning, I sat in that same coffee shop, my laptop open, the photos pulled up, waiting. Emma showed up alone. She wouldn't come. She said I'm being dramatic, that I need to accept Derek and move on. The defeat in her voice was crushing. But then the door chimed and Linda walked into the coffee shop, looking frazzled and tired. Emma? Linda slid into the booth next to her daughter, not looking at me. I almost didn't come, but Emma begged me, and I'm so tired of fighting, so say whatever it is you need to say. I didn't waste time. I turned the laptop toward them and walked them through every document, every clause, every red flag. I explained how Derek had positioned himself to control Emma's money, how the prenup protected him even if the marriage failed, how he'd taken advantage of David's vulnerability. Linda's face went from defensive to confused to horrified as I talked. When I finished, she sat back, her hands trembling. I didn't see it. I thought he loved me. I thought he wanted to help. Emma put her hand on Linda's arm. It's not your fault, Mom. He's good at this. He fooled all of us. Linda looked at me, tears in her eyes. What do I do? The wedding is in 4 hours. I took a breath. You call it off right now, and you get Emma to a lawyer, a good one, not your ex-husband's old family friend. You fight to get Derek removed as trustee. Linda nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Okay, I'll do it. She stood up, squaring her shoulders, and pulled out her phone. I watched as she dialed Derek. When he answered, I could hear his cheerful voice even from across the table. Hey babe, you getting ready? I can't wait to see you in that dress. Linda's voice was steady, stronger than I expected. Derek, the wedding's off. I know what you're trying to do. It's over. There was a long pause. Then Derek's voice changed, dropping that friendly facade. Linda, don't be stupid. Think about what you're giving up. Think about Emma's future. Emma's future is exactly what I'm thinking about. Lose my number. She hung up. I felt a surge of pride for this woman I barely knew, standing up to the man who'd manipulated her. But I also felt a twinge of fear. Derek wasn't going to take this well. And I was right. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. Derek. I let it go to voicemail. Then he texted. I know what you did, Sarah. You're going to regret this. A chill ran down my spine. I immediately called my lawyer friend. Derek's threatening me. I need to know my options for protecting Mason. She advised me to document everything, consider a restraining order if he escalated, and modify the custody agreement to supervised visits only until things settled down. I hated the idea of keeping Mason from his dad, but his dad wasn't the man I thought he was. Over the next few weeks, things got messy. Derek tried to fight the removal of his trustee status, but with the documentation I'd provided and testimony from Emma about her father's incapacitation, a judge granted a temporary suspension pending a full hearing. Linda hired a top-notch estate attorney who tore Derek's paperwork apart. It turned out Derek had done this before. Not the exact same scam, but he had a history of targeting vulnerable women. My anonymous texter? It was his second ex-wife, someone he'd married right after our divorce finalized. She'd figured out his pattern and had been trying to warn his new victims. She reached out to me properly after Linda called off the wedding, and we met for coffee. Her name was Rachel, and her story was eerily similar to Linda's. Whirlwind romance, quick engagement, and a suspicious interest in her family's money. She'd gotten out before he could do real damage, but barely. I've been watching him, Rachel told me, stirring her coffee with shaky hands. I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't let him do to someone else what he almost did to me. When I saw him with Linda, saw how fast things were moving, I knew I had to do something. I thanked her, genuinely grateful. Without her warning, Emma could have lost everything. As for Mason, I filed for modified custody. Derek didn't fight it. Probably because he knew his reputation was trashed, and any court would side with me once they heard what he'd done. We settled on supervised visitation at a family center, and honestly, Mason seemed relieved. Kids know. They always know when something's off.
During one of those supervised visits, Mason asked the supervisor if he could talk to me privately. When I came into the room, he climbed into my lap and said, "Mommy, I'm sorry I didn't tell you more about Daddy. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to say it." I held him tight, fighting back tears. "Baby, you did tell me. You warned me. You were so brave." "Is Daddy a bad person?" he asked, and God, that question destroyed me. I fought carefully about my answer. Daddy made some really bad choices. He hurt people, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. People are complicated, honey. Sometimes the people we love can disappoint us. Mason nodded against my chest. "I still love him, but I don't want to live with him." "You don't have to, baby. You're safe with me." And he was. We both were. But the story doesn't end there, because life isn't that neat. About a month after everything went down, I got a call from the hospital. Derek had been in an accident, a bad one. He'd been working job and a scaffolding collapsed. He was in critical condition. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, feeling this complicated tangle of emotions. Anger, betrayal, but also sadness. This was still Mason's father, still the man I'd once loved enough to marry. I called my mom to watch Mason and drove to the hospital. Derek was in the ICU, hooked up to machines, his face bruised and swollen. The doctors said he'd broken both legs, fractured his ribs, and had internal bleeding. It was touch and go. As I sat in that sterile waiting room, Linda walked in. We stared at each other for a moment, and then she sat down next to me. I know it's weird that I'm here, but despite everything, I did care about him, and Emma wanted me to check, wanted to know if he was okay. We sat in silence for a while, two women who'd both been fooled by the same Nan, both trying to make sense of it. "I'm sorry," Linda said eventually, "for what he almost did to you and Mason, for not seeing it sooner." I shook my head. "You were grieving, vulnerable. He knew that. It's not your fault." "How's Emma?" I asked. Linda's face softened. "She's good. Her dad passed away 2 weeks ago, peacefully, at home. But before he died, he got his affairs in order properly, made sure Emma's trust was ironclad, removed Derek completely. She's going to be okay." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you. And Sarah, thank you for saving us." Derek survived the accident, but he was never quite the same. The injuries left him with chronic pain and limited mobility. He couldn't work construction anymore. I'd like to say he had some grand moment of redemption, some realization of what he'd done and heartfelt apology, but that would be a lie. Derek blamed everyone but himself, blamed me for interfering, blamed Linda for calling off the wedding, blamed Emma for being difficult. He never took responsibility. But here's the thing, I stopped waiting for him to do. I stopped needing his acknowledgement or his apology. I focused on Mason, on building a life where my son felt safe and loved and valued. We went to therapy, both of us, working through the betrayal and the confusion. Mason's visits with Derek became less frequent as Derek's bitterness grew, and eventually Mason decided he didn't want to see his dad anymore. I didn't force it. I told him that when he was ready, if he was ever ready, the door would be open. As for Emma, she became an unexpected part of our lives. She and Mason bonded over being kids who'd been let down by the adults they trusted. Linda and I formed this weird friendship born from shared trauma. We'd meet for coffee sometimes, talk about our kids, about healing, about moving forward. Emma's trust was managed by a reputable firm now, and she was thriving. Sophomore year turned into junior year, and she was talking about colleges, about studying law to help people like herself. "I want to protect kids whose parents can't protect them," she told me once, or won't. I thought about that anonymous text that had started everything, the stranger who'd cared enough to warn me. I thought about how one person's courage to speak up saved multiple lives from being ruined. And I thought about Mason's warning, those words he'd whispered in the dark. "Mommy, I think Daddy's doing something bad." He was right, and I listened. 6 months after the accident, I was putting Mason to bed when he said, "Mommy, I'm glad you're my mom." "I'm glad you're my mom too, baby. Why do you say that?" He shrugged, playing with the edge of his blanket.
Because you listen, even when it's hard. I kissed his forehead, my heart swelling. I'll always listen to you, Mason. Always. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine watching the sunset. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, to engage, to ask why he'd done it all, but I realized I didn't need those answers anymore. Some people are broken in ways that can't be fixed. Some people make choices that can't be unmade. All you can do is protect yourself and the people you love and move forward.
I didn't text back. Instead, I deleted the message and went inside, checking on Mason one more time. He was sleeping peacefully, his little chest rising and falling, his face calm and content. Safe. That was what mattered. The next morning, I got an email from my lawyer friend. Derek had signed away all parental rights. He'd done it quietly, without fight or drama, just signed the papers and walked away. The lawyer said he was moving out of state, starting over somewhere else. Part of me felt sad for him, sad for the man he could have been, the father Mason deserved. But mostly, I felt relief. Mason and I were free. Free to build a life without looking over our shoulders, without wondering when the other shoe would drop. We were going to be okay. Better than okay. Emma texted me that afternoon. My lawyer said Derek's gone. It's really over. I replied, it's over. Now we heal. Thank you, Sarah, for everything. You saved my life. I looked at that message, tears in my eyes, and thought about how strange life is, how a moment of listening to your child's instincts, a moment of trusting a stranger's warning can change everything, how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask questions, dig deeper, refuse to accept easy answers. I thought about Mason, about how he'd known something was wrong even when he couldn't articulate it, about how children are so much smarter than we give them credit for, so much more intuitive. I'd almost ignored his warnings, almost dismissed them as childhood anxiety or adjustment issues, but I'd listened, and that had made all the difference. That weekend, Linda, Emma, Mason, and I went to the park together. We had a picnic, the kids ran around playing, and for a few hours we were just two moms and two kids enjoying the sunshine. As I watched Emma push Mason on the swings, both of them laughing, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The nightmare was over. We'd all survived. We'd all come out the other side changed, maybe a little scarred, but stronger, wiser. That night, after Mason was asleep, I sat down and wrote an email to Rachel, Derek's second ex-wife, the anonymous texter who'd started it all. Thank you for warning me. Thank you for caring enough about strangers to speak up. You saved us. I hope you're healing too. If you ever need anything at all, I'm here. We're all here. The women Derek tried to break. And we're not broken. We're stronger than he could ever be. Take care of yourself, Rachel. You're a hero, even if nobody else knows it. She wrote back the next day. We have to look out for each other. That's how we win. That's how people like Derek lose. I'm proud of you, Sarah. Proud of Linda and Emma. We did good. And we really had. So here I am, 3 months later, telling you this story. Mason's doing great in school, thriving actually. He's made new friends, joined soccer, and barely mentions Derek anymore. Linda and Emma are healing, taking it day by day. David's business was sold to a reputable buyer, and Emma's trust is secure, managed properly, set to fund her college and her future. As for me, I'm dating again, taking it slow, but open to the possibility of love. Real love, the kind built on honesty and trust, not manipulation and greed. I've learned to listen to my instincts, to pay attention to red flags, to trust my son when he tells me something's wrong. And Derek? Last I heard, he's living in some small town in Tennessee, working a desk job, alone. I don't wish him harm, but I don't wish him well either. I just wish him away from us, away from anyone else he might hurt. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd ignored Mason's warning, if I'd dismissed that anonymous text, if I'd convinced myself that Derek was just moving on with his life and it was none of my business. Emma would have lost everything. Linda would have married a con artist. Mason would have grown up watching his father destroy other people's lives. But that's not what happened, because I listened, because I trusted, because I acted. And I'm telling you this story not because it has a perfect happy ending. It doesn't. not. Life doesn't work that way. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something important. When someone you love, especially a child, tells you something feels wrong, listen to them. When a stranger reaches out to warn you, don't dismiss it. When your gut tells you something's off, investigate. The world is full of people like Derek, charming, manipulative, predatory. They target the vulnerable, the lonely, the grieving. They're good at what they do, but they can't survive in the light. They need secrecy. They need blind trust. They need people to ignore the warning signs. So don't ignore them. Shine a light. Ask questions. Protect yourself and the people you love. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Keeping the people you love safe. Teaching your kids to trust their instincts. And having the courage to face ugly truths, even when it would be easier to look away. Mason warned me about his dad. I listened, and that simple act of listening, that choice to trust my 7-year-old's instincts over my desire to avoid conflict, saved multiple lives from being ruined. So, if you take anything away from this story, let it be this. Listen to the warnings, trust your gut, protect the innocent, and never, ever underestimate what someone will do when they think they can get away with it. Because they will. They absolutely will. But if we stand together, if we warn each other, if we refuse to be silenced or dismissed, they won't succeed. We're stronger than they are. We always have been. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope you never need to use these lessons. But if you do, I hope you remember them. Stay safe out there. Trust your instincts and always, always listen when someone you love says something feels wrong. Because sometimes the smallest warning can save you from the biggest disaster. And that's worth everything.